You're listening to The Back 40, the podcast for Ontario farmers, covering topics and issues that matter most to Ontario agriculture. Brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm the host of The Back 40, Mike Bryan, agribusiness specialist at Trillium Mutual Insurance. Many of us are familiar with driving through the countryside and seeing various structures out there that have solar panels on them. A few years ago, we had the microfit and fit programs that the Ontario government came up with, and you do see quite a few of the microfit units in my area. And there's a couple of sheds and buildings that have been built with a monoslope and have quite an area of solar panels on them that are being used to generate electricity for the Ontario grid. As I said, we're all kind of familiar with that, but if you go down to the Leamington area or the Niagara area, there are acres and acres of greenhouses that have roofs there that might be available for solar panels. Of course, the only problem there, if you block the light, how do you grow the crop? Seems a bit counterintuitive, but there's a company out there that is actually trying this and being very successful at it. Today, we're talking with Martin Pochtaruk from Heliene, and we're talking about solar panels and producing our food all from the same area. Martin, welcome to the Back 40.
Thank you, and thank you for your interest on the matter.
So, Martin, how did someone come up with this idea? As I said, it seems a bit counterintuitive that if you block the light, you're still able to produce the crop underneath, but you're being quite successful with that idea.
So what Heliene has done over the years is look for the possible integration of solar power generation in other streams of industry. So the business of the company since 2010 has been manufacturing solar modules, what everybody calls a solar panel, this is the same thing, for power generation on different, sites of power plant. So it could be the roof of a house, or it could be a field with tens of thousands of them. And that's the product we make, the bread and butter product that the company manufactures, both in Canada and in the US. However, as I was saying, we have been looking for the integration of solar power generation on different places, both on Earth and in space. So not too many people might know that Heliene out of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, has developed and manufactured for tens of satellites the solar modules that are powering the SpaceX low-altitude Starlink program. So that, again, is a solar module. It's very different. It's very fragile, but it's a product that we have made and sold. In the case of greenhouses, where we have a very high demand for energy, that in many cases is offset by generation right within the space of the greenhouse. Since early 2020, we have a pilot project that has been successfully offsetting the demand of Freeman Herbs. So in Lincoln, Ontario, Freeman Herbs has a 10-acre greenhouse, and using 4% of the roof of that greenhouse, we're able, and we have demonstrated, that we can generate 10% of the energy demand. So what that shows is that you can size the area of your roof to actually offset up to 100% of your power demand. These solar modules that are on that pilot project have 33% of the area with solar cells, so they're not completely full of solar cells. These solar cells are bifacial. What does that mean? They do produce power by catching the light that comes directly from the sky and also from the reflection that is coming from under them. And with 33% of glass pane coverage, we're actually not producing any shade that is noticeable by the crop. So we had, for a full year, Niagara College monitoring this installation and having a witness area. That means having a crop under just a standard pane of glass and the same crop at the same time under the solar modules. And they both grew at the same speed in the same period of time. What that means is that we can certainly have a double use of land with power generation on the glass of the greenhouse and a crop growing under it.
Now, I was always taught when I was in school that your growth is somewhat proportional to the amount of sunlight Now, it obviously there is, even though there's no shade, no perceptible shade that's produced, there's got to be not quite as much light getting through there. How do you work with that in order to compensate for that, or are there other things that you're doing in order to make this more efficient?
So on that pilot project, what it was used and incorporated into the solar module is a polarizing backsheet. So, within the materials that are used, we have the glass pane, that is the front of the module and which is exposed to the elements. So that is the roof of the greenhouse itself. The solar cell is a crystal, then they are interconnected so that the light that comes in comes out of it as electricity. And it has a film that polarizes the light. The polarization, what it means is the polarization of sunglasses. It only allows certain frequencies for light to go through. What we're working on right now is on a shifting film. What does that mean? It means that when you have all of the frequencies that compose light, we see light as white, but in reality it has a mixture of frequencies going from what we cannot see to the visible frequencies composed of colors that we generally see on a rainbow. Plants for photosynthesis use the red, orange, and yellow part of that spectrum. So what we're working on right now is the incorporation of a light shifting nanocoating that actually transforms all of the frequencies only on the yellow, orange, and red part of the spectrum. So we're amplifying those frequencies that the plant will actually use for photosynthesis. That means in 1 hour of sunlight, the plant is going to receive more than just that 1 hour, because basically we'll get more of what it can use. So this is not a new product. Of course, it will be a new product once incorporated into a solar module. But this is a product that has been proven and is being shipped out of UBQD. UBQD is UBI, letter Q, letter D. This company is a proven nano-coating manufacturer based out of New Mexico in the US that is manufacturing a film with this type of nano-coating that shifts light and selling it to greenhouses. So if you go to the UBQD website, you will see that this film has been adopted all around the US. It's now being shipped to Ontario as well. And it has a shelf life in between 3 and 5 years, depending on the environment where it's being hung. So right now, it's being hanged as a canopy under the glass. So what we're working together with UBQD to do is to actually being able to laminate this film inside the solar module. And by doing that, it will not have access to oxygen. It will not oxidize. So that film will be able to last for a period of 20 plus years, as long as the roof is there.
So now, if I recall my science, and that is going back maybe a few years here, the reason plants appear to be green is because they don't use the green light, they reflect that. So if you shift that to red, they're going to receive light that they can grow more efficiently on. And that compensates for the fact that you are blocking a certain percentage of that light in order to produce electricity for this. Now, you said you've proven concept here, basically covering, I think you said 4% of the glass and producing 10% of the electricity. Are we going to see this technology adopted widespread in the Ontario industry? I mean, obviously, this is something that from an economic standpoint, people are going to look at that and say, hey, that's a great idea, but what's it going to cost me? Am I going to make money? Is this economical at this point?
The economics of it will vary with the price of the electricity you are offsetting. So the financial model of setting this up on your roof, what you need to consider is, over a period of time, I'm going to offset power generation. How much am I paying for that power generation that I'm generating myself? And that varies from place to place, right? So in Ontario, that energy might be, at 12 or 13 cents per kilowatt hour on Canadian dollar. If we consider California as another possible jurisdiction, that kilowatt hour, it will be around 30 cents or 33 cents of US dollar. So it's not the same, right? If you consider New Jersey as another jurisdiction, that might be, 22, 23 cents of US dollar per kilowatt hour. So the payback or, the return on investment will vary substantially depending on what you're offsetting. There's another factor, and that is, when we consider Ontario in particular, do you have enough power in the feeder that comes to your property to actually increase the size of your greenhouse? Do you have that or not? If you don't, there is not enough power available for growth unless there is a new transmission line built, and that we're talking about tens of millions of dollars, but nobody knows when and if it's going to happen. Then growers need to think on how do they grow and where is the energy required for that growth coming from. And it could be a combination of gas boiler, geo installations to bring the necessary heat from a water circuit that is buried under the greenhouses. So it will be always a combination.
Yeah, we think of in Ontario, we've got lots of electricity, we've got lots of opportunity, and sometimes we don't think as much about the potential for limitations there. And it's not the power, it's the grid. I know in my area here,
Right.
A lot of people were interested in the microfit, and eventually they stopped getting permits because the lines weren't sufficient to be able to take the load of the production of that electricity. What we're talking about in Leamington is the opposite situation, where if they want to grow, they've got to have access to that electricity. It just can't be carried on the existing infrastructure that we've got.
Yeah, and that is a very big investment, right? An investment that has to be done by the province, but we all end up paying for.
Absolutely. That's how it usually works. We all end up paying for those projects. And if we can do that without building that, the most cost effective may be to produce the electricity right on the same site with the same thing.
And that is now possible in Ontario. So net metering is now possible. It wasn't for many years, but it has been regulated not too long ago.
So your net metering, you're looking at drawing power when you need it and feeding power back in when you don't. Like obviously, this is going to be producing electricity during daylight hours.
You may not sell anything. You might consume all of it yourself. So that comes with an assessment of what is your expected consumption, then sizing up a solar system to basically cover your requirement without the need to sell. But again, that will depend and will need to be assessed on a site-by-site basis.
Right. So what we're talking here now, for what you've done a retrofit on greenhouses in order to adopt this technology. What's the difference between doing a retrofit and a new construction there? Is there any real difference to the way that you go about doing this?
Not really. So the only difference on a retrofit is that the size of the glass, the pane of glass is very special and it needs to fit in the space you have. What it means is that when buying the glass, it's a special order. When you're building a new greenhouse, you can then specify the structure, which is the greenhouse itself, for the glass size that is more common.
That should make it more cost effective than from a new construction perspective there. You can use what's available there. This is not your number one business here. You've been doing this for quite a while, and you said from 2010. Is this the same technology, though, that what you're using for your other installations? There's nothing particularly special about this, is there?
No, it's not. So, the end solar module comes from the same manufacturing line, and these solar modules have less solar cells. We're going to be working with University of Western Ontario. It's actually on a study of concentration of nanocoating versus shading. So we're going to be working with the universities is to set up a series of greenhouses within campus, having different concentrations of the nanocoating. The nanocoating is product. If you think of it like ping pong balls, you have more mini, micro, nano ping pong balls in that coating or more, so that the light, the photon, when it hits a ping pong ball, think of it as the little piece of glass that we used to play with in elementary school to see the spectrum of light. And you see all of the colors of the rainbow. With this particular ping pong ball, all the light that comes out is only yellow, orange, and red. So by playing with the concentration, going from no solar cells to more solar cells, what we're going to be studying in this partnership with Western University is what is the possible shading. So how many solar cells can we include on a pane of glass not to affect the growth of the plant.
Is your organization in need of funding for a capital project? Trillium Mutual's Roots Community Fund provides funding towards projects such as renovations, expansions, and equipment purchases that support rural Ontario. Roots helps ensure that these organizations will remain a crucial part of the local community. To learn more about Roots, including how to apply, visit our website at trilliummutual.com and click Community at the top of the page.
Now, is there any difference in what crop you put underneath it? Does it make a difference as to whether it is, say, peppers or tomatoes or cucumbers? Any differences there?
So far, it has been no particular difference on what is the type of crop that is grown under. The effect overall of the ubiquity canopy is that increases the speed and the efficiency of that crop growth in between 10 and 20%.
So if you're increasing the efficiency by 10 to 20%, that's going to compensate somewhat for the lack of light.
Yeah, and it's also a matter of height. The glass of the greenhouse is not immediately on top of the plant. You are,
Right.
3 or 4 meters up. So that's why there is an integration of the light that is not only the light that comes down directly on the plant, but the overall environment light.
For the greenhouses that you're going to be testing in London, Ontario, what sort of crop are you looking at underneath it there? Is it one specific crop that you're working with, or do you have a multitude of crops?
The length of a crop growth is in between 5 and 7 weeks. This is a multi-year study that will allow us to do it on several crops, 3 or 4 times the same crop to be statistically significant.
Now, something else that obviously is going to make a difference here, we don't get the same amount of light throughout the year. Depending on what time of the year, we get a bit more light, and other times we get a bit less light. Any major differences this time of year? We're recording this very close to the shortest day of the year, but in the middle of June, obviously we get a lot more hours of daylight. Do we see any differences due to that, or is that something that's just related to the normal amount of light you get anyway?
More hours of light, it will mean that the plant will grow faster. And in winter, we also need to complement heating, right? And in winter, we also complement with LED lighting. And the LED lighting will be under the roof. And for that, the canopy and the solar module will do nothing. This brings up a very good point. There is not one solution fit all, but it will be a combination of what other sources of light are used, particularly in the winter. There's almost no LED lighting being used in the summer. I mean, some might use LED lighting because they find that it affects the flavor one way or another, but not for growth. So we are going to be working with lighting companies to see how our solution could be complemented, particularly for the winter months in northern latitudes.
That shorter daylight that we get in the winter is certainly, along with the colder temperatures, is a challenge that greenhouse operators have faced for years. How do you be economically competitive when you don't get as much light and you have to supply heat? This may be part of the solution here, is to see if you can't collect a little bit more energy during the day and make it useful for you.
And that also, comes down to diminishing the carbon footprint of a greenhouse. So one of the criticisms of our winter crops is from carbon footprint. And, and having energy production on the roof will offset the carbon footprint of the greenhouse.
For people that are looking for an environmental solution here, we could be looking at greenhouses being carbon neutral then, using this technology?
Exactly, particularly in film and air. We're using 4% of the roof and generating 10% of the power requirement, right? You can offset your entire power requirement by sizing the solar system that is installed on a greenhouse. Besides the reality of the carbon footprint, is a very strong marketing point when selling to Ontario consumers.
Yes, sometimes it's not just about whether or not it's economical. Sometimes it's about what you can market and what
Correct.
people will buy and what people will pay extra for. When you're doing the construction of these greenhouses with the solar panels, Is there any structural differences that you have to take into account when you're building a new greenhouse? And do you have to reinforce the existing greenhouses, or is it replaces the glass?
It just replaces the glass. So the difference is not structural, it's electrical. So from the structural point of view, instead of inserting a blind piece of glass, right, it's going to be a solar module. The weight difference in between a pane of glass and a solar module might be grams, right, because the solar system itself is very light. However, each one of them will need to be connected to each other in series to set up solar systems. So the additional work is the electrical work to basically connect the solar system together.
And no particular susceptibility to things like wind or hail or anything?
Not at all. So the solar system is on the inside of the building. So the outside is just a pane of glass similar to the others. The thickness of it is exactly the same as the thickness of the rest of your glass.
It's going to be the same issue no matter what you're looking at.
Correct. For the greenhouse itself, from the structural point of view, there is no difference.
So for this technology, you're working on the coatings on the inside, putting the coating to switch the spectrum of light. What else do you see coming down the pipe for this? How soon are we going to see this to be a widespread technology, either in places like California or Holland or in Ontario?
We're already seeing this technology being used without the light shifting coating. Last year, we sold panes of glass with the solar embedded technology with transparent backsheet to a greenhouse in Washington State. This greenhouse is producing energy and having a crop under it today without the light shifting. So this is something that is already being used. That was a new greenhouse. It was built by an Ontario greenhouse builder in the US, and it was specified with parts of that greenhouse having the embedded solar system in it. That has already been working for 9 or 10 months. Again, that technology is possible today. Greenhouse owners, could retrofit their installations, the greenhouses with it today. The live system technology embedded into the solar module is a product that we're working right now to develop. In mid-December of 2021, we expect to have a product ready by April of 2022. So we're four to 5 months out.
That's pretty close. We're looking at a technology here that could be extremely efficient in less than half a year.
Correct. Yeah, that is the plan.
And I'm assuming that you're expecting that the majority of your growth for this product and demand for this product is going to exist in places like you mentioned, California, New Jersey. That's where a lot of this is going to start. But we may also see some down and around the Leamington area as well.
Yes, and not necessarily because of cost offset, but because of power availability requirement. Need and requirement has a different face, a different appearance. Depending where we are. We are right now quoting for a series of greenhouses that will be built that already permitted in Ohio for the summer of 2022.
That sounds like this is something that's about ready to take off, that this is something that a lot of people are going to start considering very, very quickly.
Greenhouses are growing, right? So the greenhouse business itself is growing because of the need to grow food closer to where it's consumed, and also because of a shift in consumer patterns.
Many years ago, when I worked for Agricor, we had a gentleman came in who was a greenhouse operator and was growing tomatoes. And he talked about the product that consumers wanted at that time. And he said, if you think back for me now, that's getting back 40 years ago, we used to buy tomatoes in the wintertime that were, well, they were sort of pinkish, but a lot of a green tinge to them. And I swear if you dropped them, they would have bounced, but it was all we could get. And he said, if you tried to produce that at that point, which is now like 10 years ago, he said, nobody would buy it. The consumer preference is they want that nice red tomato, and they want that tomato that tastes like a tomato. And now we're seeing another shift where consumers are saying, I want that same tomato. I want it to taste like it does in the summertime. And you better be carbon neutral at the same time.
You reminded me of one of the tales I grew up with. My paternal grandparents were Russian. And I always, remember my grandmother who emigrated to Argentina, where I'm from, in the early 1920s. And, every time, and I heard this, I don't know, a million times, every time she was slicing a tomato, she would say, we would only get tomatoes in Russia in the winter, no different than us here in Canada. As you would say, we would get only, tomatoes once and twice every year. And it was a fruit, and we all sit down to contemplate it and slice it like a tangerine and just have a bite. And that happened once or twice a year. So, we're very privileged to have developed these technologies and have the availability of greenhouses and that, improving the product year after year.
I know that there's a gentleman, I don't know if he still is, but he was actually producing bananas in Ontario in a greenhouse. And that is something that'll blow your mind when you think about that, because that's certainly something we would never have considered 25, 30 years ago. And certainly my parents would have thought that was just ridiculous that we could have that. I think that you're probably looking at a situation here that as we become more carbon neutral, will this technology come down in price enough that it becomes more economical as well as you produce more of it? Or are you already at a point here with solar panels? There's a lot of solar panels out there, and the technology has improved over the last 20 years quite a bit.
What you are referring to is what's generally called grid parity. How efficient is your power generation to offset what you're buying? Mm-hmm. Right? And in many jurisdictions, we're well beyond grid parity. What that means is that producing your energy is cheaper than buying it. And that is the case in places, let me repeat myself, like, California or New Jersey. Then you have other places like Massachusetts, where if you're generating electricity and also have a crop on the same square foot, then you get an incentive, a monetary incentive, because of doing that. So whether you have an incentive and make it economically viable, or you don't have an incentive at all, but the power that you're offsetting is much more expensive. So, we're fortunate in Ontario and even more fortunate in Quebec because the price that we pay for energy is still cheaper than those other jurisdictions. We never think of that.
No, we only think what goes out of our pockets is what we think of when it comes time for that.
We compare ourselves with Manitoba, Quebec that pay less, but we need to think that there are other jurisdictions where they actually pay more.
If people want to find out more about your company or about this technology, where's the information available?
So we are starting to prepare more and more information for the greenhouse integrated product in the solar publications like PV Magazine. We're going to have, an article very shortly. But again, if you refer to the website, www.heliene.com, there will be contact for the sales team and for the product development team to get more information on it. And we're going to have shortly also a video that was shot at the Freeman Herbs available for everybody to see.
I assume that video is going to go through a lot of the information that we've talked about here and talk about the idea of producing, even though you've got electricity, you're also going to be able to produce the same crop underneath it.
Correct. And also, what I advise is to take a look at the information that UBQD has made available through their website, because that is exactly what we are using, what we will be using to embed into the solar module. So that life-shifting nanocoating is a product that is already available in the market.
Farmers love new technology. There's always something new out there, and this certainly qualifies. It's a little bit of a different concept, but I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes in the next few years, how many operators adopt the new technology. We've been speaking with Martin Pochtaruk from Heliene, and we've been talking solar panels and crop. Martin, thank you very much for joining us on the Back 40.
A pleasure, and thank you very much for your interest. Look forward to talking about it again in the near future.
You've been listening to The Back 40. Join us next time when we talk soil conservation and the role that Ontario's conservation authorities play in the preservation of Ontario's agricultural land. Our guest will be Chris Van Esbrook from the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority. That's next time on The Back 40, brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance. Be sure to subscribe to The Back 40 wherever you find your favorite podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. The Back 40, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm Mike Brine. Until next time, take care and stay safe.